7 people were eaten alive in front of a crowd. A 100-man hunting team was completely powerless against the beast. A bear, seemingly clumsy and harmless in appearance, turned out to be incredibly dangerous. Why did it specifically target women? How did the villagers fight back with all their might? And in the end, who was the mysterious hunter that put an end to this nightmare? Hello, everyone. Welcome to the World in 10 Minutes series. Today, we're going to talk about the deadliest bear attack in Japanese history, the Sankabetsu brown bear incident. This event took place 109 years ago in a small village called Sankabetsu in Hokkaido, Japan. At the time, World War I had already broken out, and the battlefields of Europe were engulfed in flames. Meanwhile, China was suffering under Yuan Shikai's rule, struggling through difficult times. Japan, having recently undergone the Meiji Restoration, was experiencing massive internal changes. The country had barely managed to join the ranks of imperialist powers, but many regions were still undeveloped frontier lands. The village of Sankabetsu, where this terrifying incident unfolded, was one such frontier settlement. Life here was harsh and primitive. The houses were mostly made of wood and thatched roofs, making them fragile. The villages were spread far apart, with almost no modern communication methods. The villagers had very little weaponry, making it extremely difficult to defend themselves. These conditions set the stage for what would become one of Japan's most horrifying bear attacks. In November 1915, a villager named Ikeda noticed something strange. One night, his horses suddenly started neighing wildly. Thinking it was nothing, he threw on a coat and stepped outside to take a look. However, he saw nothing unusual. Since heavy snow was falling, he decided to go back to sleep. The next morning, Ikeda stepped out of his house and discovered something disturbing. The corn hanging outside had been partially eaten, and there were huge footprints in the snow, each measuring 30 centimeters long. At that moment, he realized what had happened. A bear had been in his yard the previous night. Terrified, Ikeda immediately gathered 2 other hunters from the village to form a 3-man bear hunting team. They set up traps around his house and armed themselves with hunting rifles, ready to capture the bear. But for several days, the bear never returned. It seemed to be extremely cautious and wary of humans. Then, on the 4th day, the bear finally reappeared. One of the hunters spotted it from a distance and fired a shot, hitting the bear. The bear, startled, fled into the forest, but it didn't seem seriously injured. Afterward, some of the elderly villagers told the hunters that this bear was known as a rogue bear, one that failed to enter hibernation in November due to unusual circumstances. Such bears become highly aggressive and extremely dangerous. With winter snowfall making food scarce, it had no choice but to take the risk of entering human settlements in search of food. Encountering a rogue bear was a matter of life and death. 1 month later, as early winter set in across Hokkaido, the villagers were busy transporting their harvested crops out of the village. This meant that most of the men had to leave early in the morning and return late at night, leaving only women and children at home to guard the village. Upstream. Along the Sankabetsu River, the Oda family lived in a small house. That day, the man of the house, Ota, and a hired worker named Nagamatsu had already left for work. At home, only Ota's wife, Mayu, and their 6-year-old son, Yasu, remained. Around noon, Nagamatsu returned home for lunch. As soon as he entered the house, he saw Yasu sitting by the fire, his head down, completely motionless. Thinking the child was playing a game, pretending to be asleep, Nagamatsu tiptoed over, planning to scare him as a joke. But when he got closer, he witnessed something horrifying. A large chunk of flesh was missing from Yasu's neck. His body was covered in blood, and on the side of his head, there was a hole the size of a thumb. He was already lifeless. Nagamatsu froze in terror and collapsed to the ground. Suddenly, he started shouting for Mayu, hoping she was still alive. But there was no response. Rushing into the inner room, he saw more blood pooled on the floor, next to a blood-stained axe. A huge hole had been smashed through the wall, leading directly to the dark forest beyond. Horrified, Nagamatsu did not dare to chase after whatever had done this. Instead, he ran back to the village to gather help. After analyzing the scene, the villagers concluded that the bear had broken through the wall, likely looking for corn or small rodents to eat. However, when it saw Yasu sitting by the fire, it immediately killed him. Upon hearing Mayu's screams, the bear attacked her as well, severely injuring her before dragging her body into the forest. Furious, Nagamatsu and Ota wanted to immediately form a rescue team to find Mayu, but by then, night had fallen, and the snowstorm had intensified. With no other choice, they had to endure their grief and anger, waiting until the next morning to launch a search mission. At daybreak, a 30-person search team was assembled. Following the bear's tracks, they entered the forest. Surprisingly, they spotted the bear almost immediately, just 150 meters into the woods. For the first time, the villagers got a clear look at the beast. It was enormous, standing over 3 meters tall on its hind legs, covered in thick black-brown fur and incredibly muscular. Among the 30 villagers, 5 were armed with rifles. They all fired at once, but 4 of the guns misfired due to the extreme cold. Only 1 bullet was successfully shot, but it failed to hit a vital spot. Startled by the gunfire, the bear fled into the forest again. The search team pressed on, tracking the bear to the base of a large tree. There, they found what was left of Mayu, but it was only a small portion of her body. Only her skull and everything below the knees remained. The rest had been eaten. Heartbroken, the villagers carefully gathered her remains and carried them back to the village for a proper burial. However, this act enraged the bear even more. To the villagers, Mayu was a loved one. Her body needed to be returned home and laid to rest. But to the bear, Mayu's body was a hard-earned meal, a precious food source in the harsh winter wilderness. And now, humans had taken it away. For a bear, food being taken away is something that must be reclaimed at all costs. That night, Ota and 8 villagers, 9 people in total, were holding a vigil for Yasu and Mayu. But in the dead of night, a loud crash shattered the silence. The wall of the house suddenly burst open. The brown bear had smashed through the wall once again, storming inside. The 9 people inside panicked and scattered, running for their lives. The bear then swiped its massive paw, sending the corpses of Yasu and Mayu flying in pieces. Among the 9 villagers, 1 had a gun. In a desperate attempt, he fired a shot at the bear. The bear, knowing the danger of guns, immediately turned and fled. However, this time, the bear did not return to the forest. Instead, it silently moved toward another house in the village, the Miyoki family's home. What happened next was a scene straight out of hell. The bear violently smashed through the walls, just as it had done before, and stormed into the house. Inside, 10 people were present, including a pregnant woman. The bear's sudden intrusion turned the home into a nightmare of blood and screams. It immediately attacked 3 children, savagely devouring them one by one. They died instantly. The pregnant woman, unable to escape, was also ripped apart, and her unborn child was torn from her womb. Among the victims, 1 child miraculously survived, but his shoulder and thigh had been gnawed down to the bone. However, even this sole survivor did not make it. He died on the way to the hospital, gasping for air in his final moments. By this point, the bear had brutally killed and eaten a total of 7 people. By December 12, 1915, the local police finally arrived at the scene. After understanding the situation, they decided to set up an ambush inside the Miyoki family's house. Their plan was to station 6 of their best sharpshooters in the rafters of the house, waiting for the bear to return. Because there were still corpses inside, the police were certain the bear would come back to finish eating them. However, the families of the victims strongly objected. To them, their loved ones had already suffered a horrific death, and now their bodies were being used as bait. It was unacceptable. But in order to prevent more deaths, the villagers reluctantly agreed. The corpses were carefully arranged in the center of the house. Then they waited in silence. Hours passed, and sure enough, the bear returned. But this time it paced around the house for a long time, yet it refused to enter. In the end, it turned back and disappeared into the forest. The ambush had failed. After seeing the bear up close, the police came to a terrifying realization. They warned the villagers, "This is useless. This bear is too big, too strong. Ordinary weapons won't be enough to kill it. We can no longer fool ourselves into thinking we can kill this bear on our own. With our makeshift weapons, unless we shoot it at point-blank range, we won't even wound it." Realizing their firepower was insufficient, the police requested military support. Among the bear hunting team, there was an old hunter named Yamamoto Heikichi. He was a seasoned bear hunter with years of experience. In his youth, he had even killed a bear using only a short blade. After several encounters with the beast, he had gained a deep understanding of its behavior and instincts. Then, he made a shocking decision. He would hunt the bear alone. Armed with only a rifle, he set off to track the beast by himself. By this point, the bear no longer feared humans. It never strayed far from the village, and its attention was focused on the hunting squad. It never noticed Heikichi silently approaching. Using his years of hunting experience, Heikichi crept forward without making a sound. When he was just 20 meters away, he positioned himself behind a tree, slowly raised his rifle, and aimed directly at the bear's heart. Calmly, he pulled the trigger. Bang! The bullet pierced the bear's heart with precision. However, the bear was enormous. Even with blood pouring from its chest, it roared in fury and lunged at Heikichi. Without hesitation, Heikichi swiftly chambered another round, took aim, and fired a second shot. Bang! This time, the bullet struck the bear's head squarely. The two gunshots alerted the rest of the hunting team, who rushed to Heikichi's location. When they arrived, they saw the massive beast lying lifeless at Heikichi's feet. The man-eating bear had finally been slain. At the same time, a military force of 600 soldiers finally arrived in Sankabetsu. Thus ended the infamous Sankabetsu brown bear incident, a tragedy that claimed 7 lives, leaving the village scarred forever. One detail from this case raises an important question. Why is it that even today, whenever a wild predator attacks humans, it is always hunted down? The answer lies in animal psychology. Most wild animals naturally fear humans, but once they attack a person, they realize a terrifying truth. Humans are not as strong as they seem. They lack the ability to fight back effectively, and worse, they taste good. In the Sankabetsu incident, the bear's first victims were Yasu and Mayu, a child and a woman, both of whom had little ability to resist. And when the hunt squad set up an ambush in the Miyoki family's home, the bear detected the scent of men and chose not to enter. So, my final word of advice: always stay alert in the wild. Never be deceived by a bear's round and cuddly appearance. Because a bear is twice as tall as a human, 3 times as fast, 6 times as strong, and its sense of smell is 2,100 times sharper than ours. With those stats, the only thing more terrifying might be a friendly tax collector.